of Revelation doesn't necessarily have to deliver the scourge of famine. However, there are other grave threats to our planet over which we are utterly powerless. The book of Revelation makes it crystal clear that the four horsemen of the apocalypse will bring terrible times to mankind. Theologians differ on the meaning and symbolism of three of the horsemen, but there is little doubt about the purpose of the fourth. When I heard the voice of the fourth living creature say, "Come," I looked, and there before me was a pale horse, and its rider was named Death, and Hades was following close behind him. Revelation chapter 6, verse 7. If the rider of the pale horse is destined to bring about the death of the world, Earth's volcanoes would give him a very effective weapon. Since prehistoric times, we have gazed in wonder at the awesome sight of the Earth spewing its molten interior high into the air. The Romans gave us the word volcano after their god Vulcan, who pounded his fiery anvil deep within the volcano's crater. The Hawaiians of ancient times believed volcanoes were manifestations of the fire goddess Pele. Today, we know a great deal about volcanoes. However, we can do nothing at all to stop them erupting.
There are about 50 volcanoes that erupt every year. That's out of a total of about 3,000 or so. I mean, some volcanoes actually are erupting nearly all the time. Mount Etna in Sicily, for example.
The eruption of Mount St. Helens in Oregon in 1980 was memorable, but this was a mere puff of smoke compared with one of the largest volcanic blasts in recorded history. That occurred on the 26th of August 1883, when the island of Krakatoa in Indonesia literally blew apart into fragments.
Mount St. Helens threw out enough material that if you diced it up into a cube, would be about a third of a mile by a third of a mile by a third of a mile. Krakatoa in the 1880s blew out an amount of material that was about 20 times that size.
The blast from Krakatoa was heard almost 3,000 miles away. That would be like being in London and hearing an explosion in Kuwait. The enormous tsunamis generated by Krakatoa drove ocean-going ships several miles inland. Entire villages were swamped, killing over 36,000 men, women, and children. Death from volcanic eruption usually results not from the familiar red-hot lava flow, but from superheated gases that sweep down from the volcano's crater. Known as pyroclastic flow, this scalding wind can incinerate people in seconds. In May 1902, Mount Pelée on the Caribbean island of Martinique erupted, hurling ash and pyroclastic gases down onto the city of Saint-Pierre at its base. 29,000 people died within minutes. But even volcanoes like Mount Pelée and Krakatoa were small fireworks compared to the awesome force of what science calls supervolcanoes. We know that these monstrous eruptions have occurred in places as far apart as what is now Yellowstone National Park in America, most recently 640,000 years ago, and on the island of Sumatra in Indonesia. 73,000 years ago, the supervolcano Toba blew open a crater that became this lake. It is over 60 miles across. The ash from the colossal explosion covered an area the size of India to a depth of 3 feet.
Eruptions like Toba and the 3 huge eruptions at Yellowstone over the last 2 million years are in a different league from our everyday common or garden eruptions that we see from one year to the next. The worst thing about these eruptions is that they pump not necessarily the ash into the atmosphere, but the volcanic gases into the atmosphere that are capable of spreading out around the entire planet. They cool the surface very, very quickly because they reflect solar radiation back into space.
The eruption of Toba may have been sufficiently strong to cut the amount of sunlight reaching Earth by 90%. temperatures around the planet would have dropped by an average of about 10 degrees centigrade and perhaps as much as 30 degrees at the equator. Today, deep below some point on the Earth's surface, a seismic time bomb is ticking. A cataclysmic eruption is most certainly waiting to happen somewhere. One possible location is the steaming thermal pools of Yellowstone National Park in America.
Yellowstone is still restless. It's still going up and down. The ground's swelling. There's earthquake activity going on. So there's still magma down there. And the worry is that at some point in the future, that magma is going to come out again. It's done it 3 times in the last 2 million years, last time about 640,000 years ago. And on the basis of the cyclicity of those 3 events, we could have another supereruption any day now.
If a supervolcano should erupt at Yellowstone, the whole of the central United States would disappear under a thick layer of volcanic ash. The great breadbasket of the American prairie states would be made barren. Major rivers like the Mississippi and the Missouri would be turned into lifeless mudflats. Another volcanic eruption of enormous proportions may be waiting to happen in the Canary Islands. Some say it is actually predicted in the book of Revelation, in chapter 8, verse 8. The second angel sounded his trumpet, and something like a huge mountain, all ablaze, was thrown into the sea. In 1949, during an eruption of a volcano called La Cumbre Vieja on La Palma Island in the Canaries, an immense flank of the mountainside began to slide. Over 50 years later, it is still creeping down towards the sea. At some point in the future, 1,000 years from now, or maybe next week, another eruption will occur. And this enormous mass is going to crash into the North Atlantic with a thunderous roar.
When it does so, it's going to generate a mass of water, a bulge of water, something like half a mile high. We estimate that the waves, when they hit the US, will be somewhere between 10 and 30 meters high. So you're talking about between 30 and maybe 100 feet high.
When squeezed in between bays and river estuaries, this giant wave will become even higher. Any town or city within 20 miles of North America's eastern seaboard could be obliterated by this wall of water.
The distance between the crest of a tsunami wave and the next crest is hundreds of kilometers. So this water will come in as a wall, and it will just keep coming for about 10 or 15 minutes before it starts to drain out again. So these are devastatingly powerful things.
The natural disaster most frequently mentioned in the Bible is one that remains a potent menace today. In the Gospel of Matthew, the disciples ask Jesus what signs will herald the end of the world. He answers, "And there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in diverse places. All of these things are the beginning of sorrows."
Every year there are about 500,000 earthquakes. Most of them are very, very small, so we can't detect them, but there are perhaps 3,000 that are big enough to damage towns or cities. And every year there are 2 great earthquakes. So if they happen next to a city or underneath it, then you're going to get huge casualties.
Most earthquakes occur along lines where 2 tectonic plates rub against each other deep within the Earth. The most dangerous zones are in the Western Pacific, along the coast of North and South America, and along the line of the Eurasian Plate, surfacing in places like Italy, Turkey, and Iran. Many Christians think earthquakes are a timely warning of the doom promised in the Bible.
For the prophecy believer, this simply provides further evidence that the Bible is true, that the environmental catastrophes foretold in the Bible were anticipations of developments that we see in our present age.
I have read articles of earthquakes that are escalating in number and escalated in intensity. I believe that there will be earthquakes because the Bible says there are going to be earthquakes.
Most earthquake experts don't accept this view.
We don't see scientifically an increase in earthquake activity that might portend, for instance, the end of the world.
To the neutral observer, natural disasters are no more dangerous now than they have ever been. Volcanoes, earthquakes, asteroids, and giant tsunamis have been endangering the human race for as long as the species has been in existence.
They're a normal part of the way the Earth works. Whether you believe that God created the universe and the Earth or not, he created it to work in a particular way. And it's a natural way. These events are completely normal.
However, some religious groups believe that threats of nature are only some of the signs that tell us that the end of time is near. They are sure that other prophecies are now being fulfilled, and these prophecies reveal the awful news that Armageddon is almost upon us. Theologians and tyrants, saints and crackpots, all kinds of people have been predicting the end of the world ever since John of Patmos wrote down the book of Revelation in the 1st century AD. All have in common the conviction that Scripture clearly prophesies the end of days.
There are a number of signs that are given for the end times, and